Welcome back to the deep dive. The place where we don't just scratch the surface of complex material, we excavate it. We are dedicated to providing you with the essential, actionable truths you need to navigate an increasingly complex world. Today, we are wading into some seriously unsettling territory, but we're doing it with a very focused mission.
Self-protection.
Exactly, self-protection.
Yeah.
We are diving deep into the art and science of manipulation, which is categorized under the unsettling umbrella of dark psychology.
And that mission of self-protection is it's paramount. We need to be crystal clear from the start. The goal of this deep dive is not to teach you how to use these techniques.
No, absolutely not.
Our focus is purely forensic. We need to understand the minds and methods of those who, and I'm quoting the source material here, have effectively killed their conscience.
Wow.
Understanding this playbook is the single most powerful defense you have against being exploited, controlled, or, seriously harmed.
That sets the stakes immediately. Our source materials have provided a comprehensive, almost clinical breakdown of these concepts, the techniques, and the dangerous personality types involved. So let's start at the very beginning. What exactly is dark psychology, and how does it separate itself from just, general psychology?
It's a great place to start. General psychology, it seeks to understand the mind. It focuses on how our thoughts lead to actions, how emotions function, and how we generally interact with one another in a functioning, healthy society.
So it's fundamentally constructive.
Exactly. It's all about seeking mental well-being and promoting healthy human interaction.
And dark psychology flips that entirely on its head.
It does, completely. Dark psychology, by stark contrast, focuses entirely on the thoughts and actions that are, predatory in nature. It is the study of how people can exploit weaknesses in others.
So it's not about understanding, it's about weaponizing understanding.
Precisely. It specifically studies the tactics used by what the sources call clever and ill-mannered people to exploit, harm, control, or gain an unfair, non-consensual advantage over others. While general psychology studies the average mind, dark psychology studies the mind of the predator.
That's a heavy assertion for the sources to make, that manipulation is constantly occurring. What is the key distinction they draw between, say, normal, persuasive human interaction and the malicious intent defined by dark psychology?
Well, the material highlights that all human interaction involves degrees of persuasion and sometimes, even subtle unintentional manipulation.
Like a child crying to get a toy.
Right, or a friend exaggerating a point to convince you to go to a party. But dark psychology deals with deliberate, systematic exploitation. The distinction is intent and impact.
Okay, intent and impact.
When someone deliberately studies and applies these concepts with malicious intent to erode your autonomy, your confidence, or your financial stability, that's when it crosses the line. The unsettling reality is that the sources suggest this low-level manipulation is occurring constantly, often unknowingly, sometimes even starting in childhood, as a way to establish dominance or control.
That immediately frames this as essential knowledge, not just some academic curiosity. So here is our roadmap for this deep dive. First, we are going to thoroughly explore the core personality traits that form the basis of most serious manipulation attempts, the dark tetrad. Second, we will catalog the specific psychological tactics, the tools of the trade.
The playbook itself.
The playbook. Third, we will learn how to identify the manipulator when they are in action, dissecting their common defensive behaviors. And finally, and this is the most crucial part, we will spend significant time outlining the critical 8 steps for self-defense and achieving unshakable autonomy. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the foundation. The foundational personality traits. These aren't just minor quirks. The sources define these as deep underlying characteristics that make someone highly prone to engaging in serious, exploitative manipulation. We'll start with narcissism, which seems to, dominate the conversation in popular media today, but we need to understand it forensically.
Right. And forensically is the perfect word. Narcissism, within the context of the dark tetrad, is defined not just as vanity, but as a deep-seated, fragile grandiosity. They have an inflated self-view, a profound sense of entitlement, and critically, a profound lack of empathy.
So it's not just that they think they're great. They genuinely believe they are special and superior to others, regardless of any objective evidence.
Exactly. And this means they demand preferential treatment in every single situation. Think about the source material example. At a party, a casual meeting, or even a professional gathering, they expect to be the focal point.
Center of the universe.
Absolutely. They expect people to gather around them, hang on their every word, and grant them special status, perhaps the best seat, the first drink, or the loudest applause. Anything less is perceived as a slight, as a personal attack.
And their entire interaction style seems geared entirely toward utility, not genuine human connection. How do they manage to make these interactions look like genuine friendships when they're only interested in utility?
Because they are masters of superficial charm. They are incredibly skilled at forming what appear to be new, rich relationships, and this might fool the casual observer into thinking they are incredibly sociable and pleasant people.
They'd be very charismatic.
Immensely. But the source makes a sharp, necessary distinction. These are not genuine relationships, they are mere contacts. The narcissist views every person as a transactional means to an end.
What's in it for me?
Always. Are you useful for boosting my status? Are you a financial resource? Can you provide me with attention or validation? If the answer is no, the relationship will wither or be discarded immediately. They value utility far, far above loyalty.
I imagine this utility-driven mindset makes them extremely intolerant of dissent.
Oh, absolutely. They operate within a self-constructed echo chamber. Narcissists only tolerate those who validate and agree with their self-perception. If someone dares to voice dissent or disagree with their viewpoint, even mildly, the response is always punitive.
Always.
The first step is manipulation. They will attempt to discredit the dissenter or force them to retract their statement and agree.
And if that manipulation fails?
If the manipulation fails, the situation escalates rapidly because the narcissist cannot tolerate a challenge to their reality. They will often isolate that person from their inner circle and may even actively defame them out of revenge.
So it's not just disagreeing and moving on, it's an aggressive attack.
It's an aggressive approach, not just walking away, but actively destroying the dissenter's social standing or reputation. This is because, in their mind, if you challenge their reality, you become a fundamental threat that must be eliminated, either by forcing compliance or by tearing down your credibility so your dissent holds no weight.
So narcissism is the driver of status and validation. But that's only one pillar of the dark tetrad. We need to spend more time on the other three: Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism. If narcissism is about image, what is Machiavellianism about?
Machiavellianism is primarily about power and control. It's derived from the cynical belief that all people are self-serving and that the ends always justify the means.
The classic Machiavelli.
Exactly. Named after the 16th century political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, this trait involves a high degree of strategic planning, a calculated approach to manipulation, and a focus on long-term personal gain.
How does that look in a practical setting, say, in a modern corporation or a political environment?
A Machiavellian individual views every interaction, every meeting, and every relationship as a chess move. They excel in environments where deception and cutthroat tactics are rewarded, often in high-stakes politics or business.
So they're the strategists.
They are superb strategists who wait patiently for the right moment to strike. Unlike the narcissist, who needs constant attention and validation, the Machiavellian is often perfectly happy operating in the shadows, pulling strings behind the scenes. They don't need to be loved, they only need to be powerful.
That's a huge difference.
It is. Their manipulation is purely utilitarian. They calculate the maximum amount of power gain for the minimum risk.
That differentiation is crucial. The narcissist manipulates for status. The Machiavellian manipulates for strategic power. Now, let's move to the most dangerous trait: psychopathy. The source materials imply these are the individuals operating without a true moral compass.
Precisely. Psychopathy is characterized by a profound and consistent lack of remorse, guilt, or genuine emotional attachment. They exhibit superficial charm, often possess high intelligence, and maintain a consistent disregard for the rights and feelings of others.
And they're masters of mimicry, right? That's the scary part.
That's the terrifying part. They understand human emotions intellectually, but they don't feel them themselves. So they can mimic empathy, mimic remorse, mimic love, but it's all an act.
That ability to mimic emotion, coupled with their charm, makes them terrifyingly effective.
It does. They are the truly dangerous individuals because they are operating outside the normal social contract of empathy. If a narcissist lies because they fear their image being damaged, a psychopath lies because it is simply the most expedient way to achieve their immediate goal, with zero internal conflict or stress.
It's just a tool for them.
Just a tool. The material highlights the existence of successful psychopaths who thrive in high-pressure leadership roles, CEOs, surgeons, lawyers, where their lack of emotional responsiveness allows them to make cold, calculated decisions that benefit them greatly, often at the expense of others, without losing a moment of sleep.
So we have status with narcissism, strategic power with Machiavellianism, and conscience-free ruthlessness with psychopathy. That brings us to the final and perhaps darkest trait, sadism.
Sadism is simply the enjoyment derived from inflicting pain, humiliation, or suffering on others. While Machiavellianism and psychopathy use manipulation to achieve external goals, money, power, the sadist often uses it simply because they derive internal pleasure from the discomfort of others.
It's the cruelty itself that's a reward.
That's the entire point.
Can you give us an example of how this manifests in a subtle, manipulative way rather than just outright violence?
Oh, absolutely. It often manifests as subtle psychological cruelty. They might manipulate two people in an office to fight purely for the enjoyment of watching the conflict escalate. A sadist might deliberately confuse or frustrate a coworker by hiding necessary information just to watch them struggle.
So they're not even trying to get ahead, they're just enjoying the show.
They are seeking misery. The material notes that the sadist will often use highly specific, targeted insults, not to make themselves look good, like a narcissist would, but to find that single, painful spot in the victim's psyche and press it repeatedly, drawing pleasure from the victim's reaction.
And of course, these traits can overlap.
Yes. It's important to realize these traits often overlap, creating that terrifying combination we call the dark tetrad.
That establishes the foundation of the personality. Let's transition now from who the manipulator is to how they execute control. This is the toolbox, and the first tool is perhaps the most insidious because it attacks the very core of the victim's reality: gaslighting.
Gaslighting is an extremely effective mechanism because it undermines the very foundation of sanity. The victims trust in their own perceptions and memory, and it's often not a singular event. It works in insidious stages.
It's a slow burn.
A very slow burn. It typically begins with minor lies or inconsistencies, things that are often dismissed by the victim, especially if they are dependent on the manipulator emotionally, financially, or because the manipulator is a trusted figure.
So you might just tell yourself, it was a small thing, I'll let it go, or maybe I misheard.
Exactly. And that initial compliance or self-doubt opens the door for the tactic to escalate. As the lies grow, when the victim finally musters the courage to confront the manipulator responds with confident, staunch denial.
They don't just say, I didn't do it.
No, they often go on the offensive, saying things like, I couldn't possibly do that, or you must be imagining things. Why do you always try to create problems? They immediately shift the blame, making the victim defend their own sanity.
And when the victim hears this staunch denial from someone they trust or depend on, that cycle of self-doubt just accelerates.
They internalize the idea that they misremembered or that they are being too sensitive or even going crazy. This confusion is the point. The source material emphasizes that gaslighting isn't just about making the victim doubt an event, it's about making them doubt their fundamental capacity for rational thought.
The term gaslighting comes from a fascinating piece of drama.
It does. It originates from the 1938 British play and the subsequent 1943 film Gaslight. The plot perfectly illustrates this mechanism of systematic psychological destruction.
What's the story?
The manipulative husband attempts to convince his dependent wife that she is losing her mind. He achieves this by subtly performing actions that only she can perceive, notably by dimming and brightening the gas-powered lamps in their home every night.
So only she sees it.
Only she sees it. When the wife observes the fluctuations and asks why the light is changing, the husband confidently denies it, insisting the light is burning steadily and suggesting that she is merely imagining things.
Because she is isolated and fully trusts him, she has no external confirmation, no one else to validate her sight.
Precisely. She had no external validation system, and because she was entirely dependent on him, she began to believe his reality over her own eyes. This led to her mental deterioration and breakdown. This cinematic origin story highlights a critical vulnerability. Dependency, coupled with isolation, makes gaslighting terrifyingly easy to execute.
And the sources point out that gaslighting scales up, working on massive societal levels too.
It absolutely does, especially when based on pre-existing stereotypes. Societal gaslighting often involves systemic efforts to undermine the confidence of entire groups. For instance, historical stereotypes used to tell women they lack knowledge of the external world, focusing them only on the domestic sphere.
Right, or the assertion that certain castes lack wisdom compared to others.
Exactly. If members of these groups internalize these messages, which are often reinforced by media, education, or tradition, they lose self-confidence in their own judgment and capacity for leadership or external success.
This loss of confidence then translates directly into compliance.
Yes, their compliance is rooted in their lost belief in their own intellectual capacity. We see this dynamic in specific political or religious contexts as well. The material draws attention to how institutional control works by subtly eroding individual spiritual autonomy.
How so?
Well, sincere prayer, for instance, is a private, silent act. Yet centuries of conditioning have convinced many people that their connection to the divine is only valid if conducted by a special class of people through elaborate, expensive rituals.
So you need an intermediary.
Right. And this forces compliance out of fear, the fear that if they attempt to connect alone, they will fail or face divine anger. This is a massive form of gaslighting, undermining fundamental self-trust in one's personal life to maintain the control and power of an intermediary class.
If dependency is the necessary ingredient for successful gaslighting, then the next tactic, isolation, makes perfect strategic sense as the setup phase.
Isolation is the systematic, calculated process by which the manipulator cuts the victim off from their entire social support system, their friends, their family, their colleagues, anyone who might offer a different perspective or help.
The ultimate goal is to eliminate that external reality check.
Correct. The first step for the manipulator is often forensic. They identify the target's confidants and actively work to push them away. This can be subtle or overt.
So they'll look for cracks in existing relationships.
They might exploit existing minor disagreements the victim already has with a family member, fanning the flames, introducing doubt about the family member's motives. Or they may use outright lies and emotional blackmail to paint the support system as a threat.
That's insidious.
It is. The source shared a strategy where a manipulator knew the target had a strong relationship with the sister, but also a point of lingering conflict. The manipulator then subtly introduced highly emotional lies about the sister's character, escalating the conflict until the target felt compelled to push the sister away and hide things from her. This is surgical and systematic.
It's a game of dismantling the victim's emotional security network until the manipulator is the only source of truth and validation.
And this tactic is crucial because, as the source materials note, without isolation, gaslighting is almost impossible.
Right, because if you have one friend to turn to,
Exactly. If the victim has one rational, trustworthy person to turn to, a friend who says, "No, I saw the gas lamp flickering too," the denial tactic fails instantly. Isolation creates the vacuum of external reality necessary for the denial to take hold internally.
and we see isolation used politically too.
Absolutely. Think of Machiavellian leaders using hate speech or targeted misinformation to isolate religious or social groups from one another. They generate us versus them narratives.
Divide and conquer.
A classic. By fostering deep distrust and segregation, they prevent these groups from uniting politically or socially, thereby securing their own power base and votes. In religious contexts, leaders often restrict access to information about other faiths or opposing theological views, only allowing information that fits their carefully constructed agenda.
So they're building an information silo.
Yes, this isolates their followers from broader truths, keeping them dependent on the leader's interpretation. The function is always the same: controlling the narrative by controlling informational flow.
Next, let's look at how behavior is shaped and controlled over time. Reinforcement, both positive and negative.
Reinforcement is the mechanism of conditioning behavior. Positive reinforcement involves adding a rewarding stimulus to encourage desired behavior. Negative reinforcement involves removing an unpleasant stimulus to encourage desired behavior. Manipulators weaponize these simple psychological principles.
Let's look at the dark side of positive reinforcement first. The use of rewards to control compliance.
The manipulator strategically applies rewards immediately following desired compliance or tolerance. This creates a strong associative link. For example, an abusive husband might engage in violence and then, hours later, suddenly shower his wife with gifts or show extra love or affection.
The classic cycle of abuse.
Yes. This burst of positive reinforcement ensures her silence and tolerance of the preceding violence. The reward conditions the victim to stay in the dynamic, hoping the reward will recur, or minimizing the abuse because of the good times.
And in a professional setting,
In a corporate setting, a boss might offer a huge promotion, salary increase, or other coveted resource to silence an employee who caught the boss engaging in illegal activities. The reward is specifically designed to shut down the whistleblowing behavior.
Now let's tackle negative reinforcement, which is often confused with punishment, but is fundamentally different in application.
It is a critical distinction that must be understood. Punishment adds a negative stimulus, like a parent confiscating a teenager's phone for breaking curfew. Negative reinforcement, conversely, encourages a behavior by removing an unpleasant stimulus or consequence.
So you do something to make the bad thing stop.
Exactly. The victim is conditioned to act in a certain way to make the bad thing stop.
Give us a political example of that distinction.
Okay, consider the media houses. A politician might imply that the media house will avoid investigation or avoid having their tax status audited, the negative outcome is removed, if they report favorably on the government.
So the threat is always there, but good behavior keeps it at bay.
Right. The media is conditioned to report favorably to maintain their safety and cease the negative pressure. In contrast, if the politicians simply fined the media house for negative reporting, that would be punishment, adding a negative stimulus. Negative reinforcement is often more insidious because the victim is constantly chasing the cessation of pain or discomfort, not just waiting for the next reward.
In a domestic or professional sense, it could be a partner complying with all demands simply to stop the emotional abuse or shouting. The compliance removes the shouting, the negative stimulus.
Precisely. The key question is what is removed versus what is added. Negative reinforcement is incredibly effective in securing long-term internalized compliance because the victim begins to feel they are making the right choice, that they are the one responsible for the peace, when in reality they are merely succumbing to coercive control.
Our final core tactic is projection.
Projection is a classic psychological defense mechanism, but toxic people utilize it maliciously. It is the act of attributing one's own faults, insecurities, or negative hidden behaviors onto others.
Because they can't handle their own flaws.
Right. Toxic people, especially those high in narcissism or psychopathy, find it incredibly difficult to accept their own mistakes because accepting fault damages their self-image.
This sounds confusing and disorienting for the victim because they are being blamed for something the manipulator is doing.
It is devastating. The most potent example is the cheating partner who preemptively accuses the victim of cheating first. When the victim hears this accusation, they are immediately forced onto the back foot into a defensive posture.
Their energy is completely redirected.
Instantly. Their energy shifts from confronting the cheater's actual infidelity to trying frantically to prove their own innocence. The material points out the irony. The partner who is actually cheating or lying should be the one defending themselves, but by projecting, they force the victim to assume that role.
So a frequent liar might claim to hate lies.
Oh, all the time. Or a financially reckless individual accusing their partner of being bad with money. These are massive deflection tools designed to eliminate the need for self-reflection. Now that we have the core concepts and personality types, let's explore how these manifest in concrete, recognizable behaviors. Understanding these behaviors, even the most subtle ones, helps you, the listener, recognize the manipulator early, before they inflict significant damage.
We need to start with the various ways manipulators utilize deceit, because it's rarely just a simple lie. The source distinguishes clearly between lying by commission and lying by omission.
Right. Lying by commission is the straightforward factual lie, saying something that is demonstrably untrue. The material gives the classic charming anecdote of Lord Krishna caught eating butter.
I know this one.
When his mother, Yashoda, confronts him, he denies it, claiming he couldn't have reached the high shelf and blaming his friends for smearing butter on his face. This is a full defense strategy built on clear, provable falsehoods, used to maintain innocence and superiority. Manipulators, especially high-functioning ones, are comfortable doing this habitually, often with excessive detail to make the lie sound more plausible.
But the truly dangerous form is lying by omission, or what the source terms exclusionary detailing. This feels much safer for the manipulator.
It is the safest lie because it's based on selective truth. The manipulator discloses only facts that serve their purpose, systematically withholding crucial key information that would alter the victim's reaction or create a false narrative that benefits the manipulator.
And if they get caught,
If caught, the manipulator can simply say, "I only told you what you asked about. If you had asked the whole story, I would have told you." They evade moral responsibility because they technically did not say anything untrue.
the Sunny and Vicky case study is essential here because it shows how one seemingly small omission can cultivate a massive false reputation.
This is a perfect illustration of exclusionary detailing used to manage perception. Vicky was preparing for a highly stressful and expensive exam, paying the vast majority of his significant fees, about 3 lakhs, with his own hard-earned money.
So he was completely self-sufficient.
Almost entirely. Sonny, the manipulative, narcissistic older brother, simply gave Vicky his ATM card once so Vicky could pay for a small bike repair, costing maybe 3 or 4,000 rupees, a tiny fraction of the total cost. When speaking to others, friends, family, acquaintances, Sonny never directly states he funded the whole endeavor. Instead, he constantly implies he financially supported Vicky entirely by stating, "I even gave Vicky my ATM card."
And the listener, using logic, naturally connects the ATM card to the major financial endeavor, concluding Sonny is funding everything.
Precisely. Sonny is cultivating a false reputation as a generous, selfless supporter while deliberately withholding the key fact that Vicky funded his own life and exams. This narrative boosts Sonny's superior, charitable image and simultaneously minimizes Vicky's hard work, struggle, and independence.
It's pure perception management.
It's a strategic effort to generate respect without earning it, all at the victim's expense, using factual fragments to weave a deceptive tapestry. This inability or refusal to correct a beneficial misconception is a hallmark of the manipulative personality.
Let's move to the trio of defensive deceptions used when a manipulator is caught in the act: denial, rationalization, and minimization. Starting with denial.
Denial is the outright refusal to accept the truth of an action, often delivered without any trace of guilt. For someone high in psychopathy, denial is effortless because they genuinely believe their dominance is justified and they lack the emotional apparatus to feel shame or remorse.
And it's a huge red flag.
A massive one. Denial is also a clear sign the behavior will not change because they haven't internalized any sense of wrongdoing. A more clever manipulator might use indirect denial, avoiding a direct, "I didn't do it," and instead saying, "I'm sorry people are judging me, but you know there are two sides to every coin, and I'm just trying to live my best life."
Which just muddies the waters.
Completely. This indirect language makes the victim pause and doubt their initial judgment.
Then comes rationalization, which is where they use detailed explanations to confuse the victim.
This is where the meticulous planning of the Machiavellian or the high-functioning narcissist comes into play. The manipulator provides a highly detailed, often an emotional explanation to justify their wrongdoing. They strategically use factual details of unrelated or intervening events to make their convoluted theory sound plausible, which entirely confuses the victim and any bystanders.
The sources offer crucial advice for the victim here.
Yes, the material stresses. Trust your gut feeling, even if others are convinced. Manipulators spend years preparing these defensive narratives, so a direct, sudden confrontation is likely to fail, and you may find yourself alone because others are entirely convinced by the manipulator's plausible, detailed story. Rationalization turns emotional truth into a highly intellectual, confusing debate.
And finally, minimization, which feels designed specifically to destroy internal self-worth.
Minimization is the act of downplaying the significance of the victim's emotions, achievements, or the abuse itself. The goals are multiple. First, for the narcissist, it maintains their superior status. If Vicky's success isn't a big deal, Sonny is still superior. Second, and more damagingly, it destroys the victim's self-confidence. We saw Sonny minimizing Vicky's efforts from childhood onward. When Vicky cleared the highly competitive preliminary exam instead of celebrating, Sonny said, "Don't be so happy. The real exams are the mains."
That subtle crushing of achievement stops the victim from building the momentum they need for future success.
Absolutely. A truly supportive person celebrates the small wins to build confidence. A manipulator minimizes them to keep the victim perpetually feeling inadequate. Minimization is also central to verbal and physical abuse. "Why are you reacting like a child over such a small thing?" Or, "I barely touched you." It forces the victim to question if they are pathologically overreacting, which is a massive psychological win for the manipulator.
Next, let's look at two close cousins in conversational control: evasion and diversion.
Evasion occurs when a direct response is demanded, but the manipulator gives vague, imprecise, or irrelevant answers. They satisfy the victim that they've responded, they spoke words, but they have never addressed the core question. They are experts at conversational dodging, often using passive voice or highly abstract language.
It's like talking to a politician sometimes.
Very similar. And diversion is taking that conversational dodge a step further and changing the subject entirely, often by introducing high emotional stakes. Diversion is strategically changing the entire topic, often to an emotionally charged subject, specifically to escape accountability for the original issue. For example, a husband might be confronted about suspicious financial activities or an inappropriate relationship with an employee.
And instead of answering,
Instead of answering, he instantly diversifies the conversation, accusing his wife of constantly interfering with his business, destroying their trust, and threatening their luxurious lifestyle. The main topic, his behavior, vanishes, replaced by the wife frantically defending herself against the charge of meddling or being unsupportive.
this strategic changing of the subject to something emotionally divisive is incredibly effective in large-scale politics, often employed by Machiavellian leaders seeking to control the national narrative.
This is a textbook use of diversion. Imagine a large country plagued by chronic issues like severe youth unemployment, massive government corruption, and significant attacks on democratic institutions. When leaders are questioned about these core governance failures, they use diversionary tactics to create a bigger spectacle.
What are the common spectacle strategies the source identifies?
Well, they might raise the banner of ultranationalism, incite fear and hatred toward neighboring countries or specific minority groups, or focus public energy on a highly symbolic, culturally divisive project, such as funding the construction of large religious structures, temples, mosques, or churches.
So they use an emotionally charged, divisive cultural or spiritual topic to distract the public from genuine economic or political failures.
Correct. The leader knows the economic issues are the real existential threat to their power, but they create a bigger, more emotional threat. The neighbor, the minority group, or a grand spiritual reward, the structure, to focus the public's emotional and intellectual energy elsewhere. They successfully prevent any serious, rational debate on unemployment and corruption. This tactic works best against citizens who are not assertive and can be easily distracted by emotional appeals.
Our final two manipulative traits focus on the use of negative emotion and fear to enforce obedience. Let's start with branding anger.
Branding anger is the strategic use of sudden, unpredictable, and often theatrical outbursts of fury shouting, slamming hands, verbal abuse, throwing things. The goal is twofold. First, to dominate the situation instantly, creating a don't question me environment. Second, to avoid accountability.
Ah, the classic angry boss.
The material provides that exact example of the manager who yells at employees whenever a deadline is missed. This outburst deflects the boss's own responsibility for poor organizational management, lack of resources, or planning failures, and instead shifts the focus onto the employee's supposed incompetence.
The yelling and fear prevent genuine feedback or dissent.
Exactly. It ensures the team focuses purely on compliance and fear avoidance, not on creative problem solving or, God forbid, honest communication about the boss's failings.
That atmosphere of fear leads directly into the next and perhaps most brutal tactic: traumatic one-trial learning.
This is the intentional use of a single, highly traumatizing event, a public screaming session, physical violence, or an episode of uncontrolled, terrifying rage to instantly and permanently modify the victim's behavior.
It's based on a survival instinct, right?
Yes. Psychologically, this concept relates to survival. If an early human eats a poisonous berry once and gets violently ill, they learn instantly in one trial never to eat it again.
And manipulators apply that survival mechanism to social control.
Precisely. They create a memory so viscerally painful that the victim will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid repeating the trauma. Consider the simple example. A victim rationally complains to a loud neighbor about late-night music. The neighbor responds not with an apology, but by publicly humiliating the victim, unleashing a torrent of screamed insults and creating a massive, terrifying scene.
So that one event completely changes the dynamic.
That single overwhelming experience of public confrontation and rage is so traumatic that the victim instantly learns the lesson. Never complain again.
So they will tolerate all future disturbances simply to avoid the agony of that single one-trial trauma.
Yes, it is a very powerful, low-energy way to enforce long-term compliance. The abuser doesn't need to repeat the abuse constantly. They just need to ensure the single traumatic event was severe enough to break the victim's will and establish a permanent boundary of fear.
It's terrific.
The source material calls this a mechanism of enforced silence, and the tragedy is that the victim often rationalizes it as keeping the peace, not recognizing the profound loss of autonomy they have suffered.
We have cataloged the personalities and the tactics. Here's where it gets really interesting. Why do people fall for this? It's rarely about intellectual weakness. The sources identify specific vulnerabilities that manipulators expertly target, often in people who are otherwise quite capable.
Yes, and the material identifies specific traits that act like a beacon to predatory personalities. These are often qualities that are admirable, like empathy or conscientiousness, but which, when unchecked, become profound liabilities.
Let's start with the emotionally insecure and fragile.
These individuals are easily identifiable because they react defensively or overreact dramatically to even mild criticism or confrontation. A manipulator only needs to hurl a subtle, indirect criticism or a false accusation, and then they observe the reaction.
They're testing the waters.
They're testing. If the person becomes overly defensive, starts over-explaining themselves, or tries desperately to shift the blame back, they have revealed their deep insecurity and fragile ego.
And this fragility is not always a permanent personality trait. It can be circumstantial.
That is a crucial insight. Emotional fragility can be temporary. A person might be normally stable but is currently fragile after a bad breakup, a major career failure, or the grief following the loss of a loved one.
So manipulators look for these windows of opportunity.
Absolutely. They look for these temporary windows of vulnerability to strike. When provoked, the fragile person gives a disproportionately strong reaction, which the manipulator then uses to paint a negative picture of the victim to others. They're unstable, they have an emotional problem. This destroys the victim's credibility right before the manipulator moves in for the kill.
Next, the highly sensitive and empathetic people. Their kindness is used against them.
High empathy is a massive liability in the context of dark psychology because it makes them perfect targets for those feigning distress. Psychopathic con men, for instance, are drawn to highly empathetic people because they can spin elaborate false narratives of hardship, sudden illness, or financial difficulty.
And the empathetic person just wants to help.
They feel an immediate, overwhelming compulsion to help, often leading to financial exploitation. Their compassion overrides their rational judgment.
Their communication style, which is often overly polite, also seems to work against them when setting boundaries.
Yes, highly sensitive people are often overly polite because they are terrified of offending anyone. They use language of deference, excessive use of please and thank you, frequent apologies, which makes setting firm boundaries almost impossible. The manipulator knows they can push harder against someone who struggles to assert a polite but firm no.
They also tend to be introverted.
Yes. Their natural tendency toward quiet introversion often means they self-isolate, which, as we established, is the prerequisite for deeper manipulation.
The final two target traits are deeply rooted in social conditioning: fear of loneliness and fear of disappointing others.
The fear of loneliness is a profound vulnerability. The sources suggest this is often an outcome of intense social conditioning, particularly for certain demographics who are taught that their worth is solely tied to being in a relationship or having a family.
So they'll put up with anything to avoid being alone.
This fear leads people to tolerate horrific, abusive behavior just to avoid the perceived emptiness of being alone. The manipulator, recognizing this fear, will use silent treatment, manufactured distance, or outright threats of abandonment to control them completely.
And the fear of disappointing others creates the systematic sense of obligation that manipulators feed on.
This is a magnificent piece of forensic analysis in the source material, illustrated beautifully by the Sanchi and Rohan example. Sanchi, the manipulative girlfriend, first secures a large favor from Rohan, getting highly sought-after concert tickets at great personal expense.
So she puts him in her debt.
She doesn't just thank him, she showers him with excessive praise, constantly reminding him what a hero he is for obtaining the tickets. She is strategically building a massive unspoken sense of obligation in his mind.
She is essentially banking that favor for later use.
Exactly. Months later, when Rohan plans a trip to Manali with his friends, Sanchi calls and asks him to help her move that exact same day. When he explains he can't, she doesn't argue. She expresses extreme disappointment and guilt trips him mercilessly.
What does she say?
Things like, "I thought you cared about me more than your friends," or subtly reminding him of his past heroic effort to secure the tickets.
Rohan then caves because the emotional cost of disappointing her feels higher than the loss of his own plans.
He cancels his trip, suffers tension with his friends, and sacrifices his autonomy to help her move. Sanchi then reinforces this cycle by profusely thanking him again, reinforcing that cancellation as another example of his care, thus strengthening the sense of obligation for future exploitation.
He loses everything in that transaction.
He loses his mental peace and happiness, while Sanchi gains complete control over his time and decisions, all built on manufactured guilt.
Once the vulnerabilities are identified, the manipulator begins actively dismantling the victim's inner strength. We call this ego depletion.
Ego depletion is a well-studied psychological concept, often linked to decision fatigue. Willpower and self-control are finite resources. Once you use them up fighting small battles, you have none left for the big challenge. Manipulators weaponize this.
So they don't hit hard, they hit relentlessly with small, draining actions.
Precisely. They strategically drain the victim's finite willpower by creating repeated minor agitations, pointless arguments, and stresses. The victim tries desperately to maintain calm, using their willpower to ignore the provocation. Eventually, their reserve is empty and they snap, often over a trivial issue.
And that's when the manipulator makes their move.
When the victim finally yells, the manipulator shifts instantly. They become calm, reasonable, and play the innocent victim. They then project the image they wanted all along. See, they are immature, hot-tempered, and unstable. The manipulator succeeds in eroding the victim's credibility through exhaustion.
And the second strategy is the systematic destruction of self-esteem.
This is achieved through constant, targeted criticism, minimization of achievements, and sometimes the promotion of negative gossip. We saw how Sunny minimized Vicky's success. Manipulators use carefully worded phrases to attack achievements. When you get a promotion, they might sarcastically ask, "Oh, really? Are you sure? Must be luck." Or, "Well, someone had to get it."
It's designed to make you doubt yourself.
Exactly. This is not praise. It's an insidious questioning of your competence, making you doubt yourself and your worth, forcing you to seek validation, which they then withhold or condition.
The entire playbook is designed to make the victim dependent and internally weak, ensuring they have zero capacity left to fight back.
That is the ultimate conclusion. If you are stressed, low energy, isolated, and doubting your own reality, you are prepped for psychological domination.
We've reached the most crucial part of this deep dive. We've seen the damage, now we pivot entirely. If manipulation is a war, this final section provides the armament. The source material offers 8 powerful tactical steps that focus on rebuilding the personality to be resilient and impenetrable to manipulators. Let's walk through the tactical rebuilding of the self, starting with the painful first step. Accept reality.
This is where we shift from analysis to construction, and accepting reality is indeed the most critical, yet often the most painful step. It requires immense courage because it means accepting truths that shatter your cherished worldview.
How does that acceptance translate into self-protection?
Acceptance brings immediate mental clarity, which reduces vulnerability. If you accept a painful truth, such as a terminal illness, you immediately protect yourself from manipulation by false healers and charlatans selling bogus cures.
Right.
More relevantly, acceptance means accepting the deeply toxic nature of a loved one. A parent, a spouse, or a sibling like Vicky finally had to accept Sunny's betrayal.
That moment of acceptance for Vicky must have been catastrophic, but necessary.
It was. When Vicky finally accepted Sunny was a dark empath and a wolf in sheep's clothing, he stopped inventing alternative, false explanations for Sunny's behavior, explanations the manipulator could exploit.
So you stop making excuses for them.
You have to. If you refuse to accept that your partner is abusive, you will keep giving them the benefit of the doubt, creating loopholes for the manipulation to continue. Acceptance removes the manipulator's hiding place and gives you a strong, undeniable foundation upon which to build improvement.
Step 2 is building assertiveness. This is the practical antidote to passivity.
Assertiveness is the middle ground, the sweet spot between aggression and passivity. Aggression dominates others, passivity surrenders. Assertiveness protects yourself without trying to dominate. Assertive people project confidence. They maintain eye contact, use open body language, and speak clearly. They know what they want and state it directly.
How does that frustrate the manipulator's game plan?
Well, manipulators thrive on vagueness, emotional blackmail, and mind games. An assertive person insists on clarity. If a manipulator tries to evade a question, an assertive person uses techniques like the broken record technique, calmly repeating the core question without getting drawn into the diversion.
You don't let them off the hook.
You don't. You insist on specificity. That's interesting, but you still haven't answered my question about X. Assertiveness transforms you into a nightmare for the manipulator because you close off all their evasive avenues.
Step 3 is about weaponizing your internal discipline. Control your reaction.
Think before you react. This is the defensive shield against ego depletion and branding anger. Manipulators live to provoke an emotional outburst because an emotional response is always a predictable, controllable loss of power.
They want you to lose control.
Every time. When you are triggered, do not respond immediately. The sources advise using simple physiological techniques like deep breathing or counting to 10 to create a time distance between the trigger situation and your response.
And what is the crucial rational question to ask yourself during that pause?
The question is, what does the other person want by upsetting me right now? Once you identify that they want you destabilized, emotional, or looking incompetent, you refuse to give them that reaction. Your subsequent response must be calculated, professional, and detached, changing the rules of the game from emotional warfare to logical discussion.
Step 4 is about gaining true personal power through autonomy.
Research consistently shows that autonomy, the feeling of freedom to make your own life decisions without undue pressure, is highly correlated with genuine happiness and life satisfaction. Autonomy provides a strong, unshakable defense against those seeking to dominate.
Because you're not dependent on them.
Right. If you rely heavily on one person for validation, emotional support, or finance, you cede autonomy.
So practically, how do we exercise autonomy daily?
The simple act of learning to say no politely and firmly is the foundation of autonomy. The sources emphasize that you must stop viewing yourself as an errand boy or perpetual obligator for others. Taking ownership of your time, your decisions, and your emotional space without internal pressure like guilt or external pressure is essential.
It's about your well-being first.
Autonomy means making decisions that benefit your long-term well-being, even if they temporarily inconvenience or disappoint the manipulator.
Step 5 leads directly from that. Build self-esteem.
Self-esteem must be built internally like an engine, rather than relying on external validation or the approval of others, which is like relying on others for fuel. Manipulators target low self-esteem because people who doubt their own worth are easy to control and manipulate. They tolerate abuse because they feel they deserve nothing better.
What's the single most damaging external factor to self-esteem that we need to stop?
Stop comparing yourself to others. Comparison fuels desire. The desire for what someone else has, or the desire to be perceived as better. This comparison leaves you open to manipulation, whether it's falling for quick money scams, promising the lifestyle you see others achieving, or staying in toxic relationships because you compare yourself to friends who seem happy.
It's a trap.
A huge one. Simple self-help techniques focusing on listing your own non-comparable achievements and nurturing self-awareness can build this resilient inner foundation.
Step 6 is increasing awareness, or active situational consciousness.
This is about being constantly alert to your environment and actively observing the behavior of those around you. This is not paranoia, it is situational consciousness. You are looking for patterns of inconsistency, saying one thing and doing another, treating people differently based on status, or the rapid appearance and disappearance of superficial charm.
So you trust actions over words.
Always. By paying attention to these inconsistent actions, you can quickly spot predatory behavior. The goal is to establish boundaries and distance yourself before the manipulator has time to isolate you or drain your willpower. Observe without immediately acting or judging.
Step 7 demands immense courage, which is why the source calls it taking the painful stand.
You must recognize and accept the potential costs of holding your ground. Standing up assertively against a toxic parent, spouse, or boss will likely incur damage emotional, financial, or sometimes legal. The material is very pragmatic here. You must weigh the cost of maintaining your internal peace and integrity against the cost of external conflict.
This requires planning, not just bravado. What are some of the tactical preparations the source recommends for this stand?
Before taking the stand, you need forensic preparation. If you are standing up to an abusive partner, this means establishing an independent financial foothold, legally documenting instances of abuse or control before the confrontation, and even preparing an exit strategy, what is sometimes called a go-bag strategy, ensuring you have crucial documents, contacts, and basic resources ready.
You have to be ready for the fallout.
Yes. If you are strong enough to withstand the immediate retaliation and accept the initial damage, this step signals to the manipulator that you are no longer a target worth the effort.
And finally, step 8, which circles back to the body-mind connection. Maintain good nutrition.
This is fundamentally about physiological defense. Your mood, concentration, judgment, and self-esteem are heavily reliant on stable nutrition. Manipulators thrive when you are stressed, unstable, or suffering from energy drain or mood swings.
It's a physical foundation for a mental fight.
Exactly. By consuming balanced nutrients, especially proper carbohydrates from whole food sources like whole wheat or sweet potatoes, which release energy slowly, you maintain stable blood glucose levels, preventing sharp energy crashes.
Why is preventing energy crashes so important in a psychological defense context?
When your blood sugar crashes, your concentration drops, your mood destabilizes, and your self-control, that finite willpower we discussed, is severely depleted. This makes you vulnerable to impulsive decisions and emotional responses, exactly what the manipulator wants.
So it's about staying level-headed, literally.
Literally. Consistently consuming omega-3s, vitamins, and minerals helps maintain stable mood and judgment. If you are well-fed, rested, and physiologically stable, you have essentially raised your psychological shields against emotional and intellectual compromise. Hashtag outro June.
This has been a profound tactical journey into the darkness. We move from understanding the destructive traits of the dark tetrad narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism, through the insidious tactics of gaslighting and isolation, and finally to the necessary countermeasures of acceptance, assertiveness, and autonomy. The core defense against this entire playbook is simply the power of rational thinking and emotional intelligence, backed by physical preparedness.
And manipulation only succeeds if you, the potential victim, allow yourself to surrender in the psychological fight. Becoming assertive, demanding clarity, achieving autonomy, and prioritizing your inner peace transforms you from a ready target into a nightmare for the manipulator.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
They rely entirely on your fear, your dependency, and your lack of clarity. When those factors are removed through these 8 tactical steps, they lose their only source of power.
And as we close this deep dive, let's circle back to the tragic figure of Vicky in the source material. He only achieved self-discovery and freedom after catastrophic emotional damage, after his entire life was ruined by Sunny's subtle, persistent mind games, which were so carefully disguised as care and affection.
Yes.
That, we realize, is the hardest manipulation to recognize, the one done by people feigning love. It allows the manipulator to get closer and inflict deeper, more permanent wounds. If you are listening right now, use the clarity gained today to start your own self-discovery journey before the emotional damage is done. Ask yourself this provocative thought. Is there one relationship in your life right now, a parent, a partner, a sibling, that you are actively refusing to analyze rationally because the emotional cost of accepting the toxic truth feels too high?